Welcome to the Be Real podcast with Bobby Maximus and Joe Cebula. And we are here to talk about how you're going to stay under 10% body fat. Now, why 10%? I have no idea. It's just what people on the internet, on social media seem to care about. Joe, you've been in the fitness industry a lot of years. When did 10% become the gold standard?
God, there was a time when being under 15 was considered pretty dang good for most people. But I think with CrossFit taking off and people, seeing those athletes performing at a high level and as lean as they are, I think the expectation of the average person got a lot higher.
But let me actually word that a different way for you, Joe. Most of the world is obese. Most people aren't walking around at anything close to 10% body fat. Like, what do you think the average, and I actually should Google this, or you in front of a computer to help me, what is the average body fat composition for a male in America? What's the average body fat composition for a female in America? Because I just want to know how realistic that 10% number is. Now, I know what my number is. I'm walking around at 10.8. And that's on a DEXA, which is the gold standard for body fat tests. You can get a caliper test, and they can be really accurate depending on the skill of the person that's doing it. But a bod pod, you can throw that out. Those electronic scales people step on, you can throw that out. Those other little handheld measurement devices, you can throw that out. Like, unless it's a DEXA or that dunk tank, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't count, Joe.
But there's a whole thing on that about like the accuracy versus the precision of it. Like, it might not be an accurate measure, but if it's consistent, you can still kind of use the data. If you want accuracy, you're absolutely right. And so anything else is just, it's a number, it's something to work with, and you can work to improve that number. But whether it's a true measurement, that's so hard to say. But just looking at averages here, I got to throw this out there. Stab a guess. What do you think the overall 20 years and older body fat percentage for males is?
Oh, man, I'm going to say like 25 to 28.
28.1.
Okay, so I was pretty close. People are fat.
20 to 39, it's 26.1, and 40 and over is 28.6.
And by the way, 26 to 28, Joe, you're fat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not kind of lean. You don't kind of have a dad bod. Like, a man who's 28%, you are fat.
Yeah, you got to go.
Let's be real about that.
Yep. I wonder, though, when you look back historically, look at sculptures of Greek gods, what do you think their body fat would actually come out to? You're looking at Michelangelo's David, or you're looking at, any of the Greek heroes carved in marble. Like, what do you think their body fat actually is?
I'm guessing you're somewhere around 10 to 12. Like I said, I can compare with myself because I do DEXAs all the time. There's actually a DEXA by our gym. We have a really good relationship with the people, and I routinely go get a DEXA scan. And I'm going to say, Joe, over the past decade, I've been as high as 15. Me at 15, I still have abs. I still have veins in my arms. I still look beach ready. I still look pool ready. Maybe I look a little bit soft around the edges. Like, I wouldn't want to shoot a Men's Health cover at 15%. That said, when I did the pictures for my book, Maximus Body, and I wish I had a copy here so I could show you a picture, that was somewhere around 14 to 15%. Now,
yeah, and I have that right here. Look at this. Look who comes prepared. Look who understood the assignment.
I like it. So that is what, if you look at that cover, that's like what 14 to 15% looks like. Yeah. I've got abs, I've got nice muscle definition, but I'm what I call not cover ready or not film ready. I'm slightly soft around the edges. When we shot that movie Hunted, Joe, I was probably also 14 to 15%. And frankly, at 14 to 15% on a DEXA, I feel really good. I feel really strong. I don't get sick. I have tons of energy. My sex drive is high. My joints don't hurt. Like, that's really, really comfortable for me to sit at. When I start getting leaner, and I'm talking like under 12, You get sick a little bit more. I have more days when I'm tired. I lack energy. And why do I float up and down? It honestly depends what's going on in my life, Joe. If I'm doing a lot of jiu-jitsu or I'm in a heavy training camp, I can't keep the weight on. Like I just plummet.
Yeah.
If I'm in an off season from jiu-jitsu, or I'm specifically, and we talk about this all the time, but like, are you in and it's like it's the ultimate debate on social media right now. Are we cutting or are we bulking? Right? When you're trying to put on muscle, helps to have a little bit of body fat. You're going to eat more food. You're going to consume more calories. You're going to put on a little bit of body fat. It's really, really hard, especially when you're, I'm going to say, even an intermediate worker outer. Pumper, shaver, toner, tanner is my term for people that work out, by the way, Joe. But for people that are, trying to gain some muscle who are experienced, it's really hard to put on muscle without putting on body fat or losing body fat.
Yeah, I think the only time you can legitimately lose fat and gain muscle is when you're just undertrained, because you've got nothing but muscle to gain. There's not that much there to begin.
You're an absolute beginner. You're the person that's going to go in the gym. You're going to look at some dumbbells. You're going to put on muscle. You're going to lose fat. But there's a reason why a lot of these pro bodybuilders, they do put on fat in the off season. And there's a reason why there's a term for bulking or there's a term for cutting, because when you do have that higher body fat, you're putting on muscle easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll point out too, that I know that when you're stressed, you lose weight fast.
Yes.
And I'm the polar opposite. If I get stressed out, it's real easy for me to gain weight. And so there's some real individual difference in there as well, outside of just straight up nutrition, outside of training, just other things going on in your life can really affect that as well.
Oh, for sure. For sure. But the point I was trying to get at, Joe, with the body fat is I'll be as high as 15 or I'll be as low as 10. And that's just depending on what's going on in my life. You've known me for a decade now. I don't really train for looks. Now, I want to address that. I love looking good. Every single person loves going to the pool, peeling off their shirt and looking good. Every single person loves compliments. Every single person loves opening their social media and someone's like, wow, you're jacked, you're shredded, you look great. It's not like I'm trying to look bad is what I'm saying. But everything I've always done has had a performance first philosophy, if you will, and the looks are kind of secondary. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying? And for people out there, it's more important for me to win a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championship or win a fight than to look good at a pool. That said, if you're a person that can do stuff, if you're a person that can front squat 400 pounds, you can deadlift 600 pounds, you can do 15 pull-ups, you can run a mile in 6 minutes, you can row a 2,000 meter in under 7 minutes, you're probably going to look like a person who does those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to detach appearances from abilities too, because I know some of the strongest people in the world, if you just look at them walking around, they don't look like anything at all, but they have definitely got that strength. And that's because that's the goal. The people who look really great, like if you take the top bodybuilder at the top of their game on their day, when they're stepping out on stage to perform, and then you ask them to do something athletic, they are in no condition to do it. They are exhausted. They are on the verge of starvation, right?
Yeah, for sure. That said, though, Joe, to a trained eye, even an untrained eye, you could teach somebody in 2 minutes. There's a difference between the powerlifter that's carrying some extra weight and the sedentary person that's carrying a bunch of extra weight. You can see it in the shoulders. You can see it in traps. You
go to
can
the
see
extreme.
Look
at like a sumo wrestler. If a sumo wrestler walks in a room, you know that's a guy who can carry that weight.
Yes.
Like that isn't there by accident. There's a difference to that. There is muscle underneath all of that versus somebody who's just soft through and through.
Like couch surfing, watching episodes of Fallout again and again and again and again, or whatever. By the way, I had to plug Fallout because it's a tremendous show. I absolutely love it. But my point is, Joe, I've always trained for performance. And even the people I've trained, I've always trained with a performance first mentality. But like I said, if you train to perform, you will end up looking good. I almost explain it like this. The gym, that's going to handle the performance part of your training. That's going to handle how fast you are, how high you can jump, how hard you can throw a punch, although you got to fight train. It's going to, how much you can bench press, how much you can deadlift. the kitchen, that's what's going to take care of your looks. Because
Yes.
I also know people that train really hard, but they eat like trash, so they don't end up looking good.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like it's true to a point. But back to the thing. I've always ranged between 10 and 15%. 10% is closer to what you see now. And maybe I'm 11, maybe I'm 12, maybe I'm 11.5. But when you're on the lower end of that scale, you're going to look really, really lean. Like even a bodybuilder on stage, Joe, if you went with a DEXA scan, you'll hear these numbers thrown out. Oh, this guy's 2% body fat. If he was 2%, he would be dead. That is not true or really, really sick. Generally on a DEXA, and that's what we're talking because measurement is important. You made a really good point earlier. If you just have your little handheld device at home and that's your measure for consistency, that's fine, but it's probably not an accurate number.
Right.
A bodybuilder on stage on a DEXA is probably 7 or 8%. Like they are really, really, really lean. 15%, which a lot of people would think is, fairly high, you're still walking around with veins and abs and you look, quote unquote, cut up. There's no shortage of guys I've met. I'm like, what do you think your body fat is? They're like, oh, I think I'm a good 15 right now. And I'm like, no way in hell you're 15. And then I tell them to go get a DEXA and it's my favorite thing in the world when this happens, Joe. They come back to the gym with their results and it says they're 23, 22, 19, and they're devastated.
Yeah.
Devastated. I would actually say on a DEXA, if you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you see, if you're watching this podcast, you're like, I wonder what I actually am. I don't have access to a DEXA. If you can see visible abs, you're probably under 18%. Yeah. That would be to me like on average. Now there are differences, right? It depends. Where do you carry your fat? Some people carry it in the stomach. Some people carry it more in their back or in their legs or their butt or whatever. But in general, 18% for me is about that number where abs start to get a little soft or disappear. Visible abs, you're under 18%.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're looking at. So now that we've got the definitions in place, because if we're going to talk about how to get you to 10%, that's the gold standard. That's what everybody seems to want. We have to talk about definitions. Yeah. Because otherwise, what are we talking about right now, right? Are we talking 10% on the DEXA or 10% on the other thing? So 10%, Joe, I'm going to say this right now, probably unrealistic for most people. Yeah. On a DEXA. I know you don't want to hear it, but that's a whole lifestyle change.
Yeah. That's a full-time job. That's like you're pouring literally everything you've got into getting to that number, and there's no margin of error.
We know the guy. Hold on, I'll get him. Hey, Bobby, come here for a sec. Okay, here I am. You like that, Joe, just for dramatic effect? I wish we could cut me in and all this stuff and we could do something fancy, right? Like we got a special guest on the show, Bobby Maximus. But here's the deal. I can tell you what my day looks like and what I do to maintain 10%. So first of all, I've worked out, Joe, for 30 years.
Yeah. That matters. That freaking matters.
Decades, right?
Yeah.
And I've worked out 2 to 3 times a day. People are like, what do you mean you work out 2 to 3 times a day? Now, at times in my life, those were 3 hard workouts a day. Now, 45 years old, some of those workouts are easier, but just like a standard Wednesday in my world. I wake up, I work out. That's number 1. I go to jiu-jitsu. That's number 2. I go for an hour walk in the afternoon. I mean, I guess we could count that as number 3, whether you count an hour walk as a workout or not. And then I'll still go do a short weighted session in the afternoon or conditioning session. So some days I might not be hitting 4 workouts, but I'm hitting certainly 4 points of activity, if you will, or 4 points of exercise. On a Saturday...
An example to give just for viewers at home, like when I'm out there and we're hanging out, which doesn't happen as often as I think I would like. But we've got things to discuss. We've got business. We're talking about, the podcast. We're talking about social media stuff. We're talking about our app. We're not just like sitting at a table having a conversation. We're usually out in the garage doing curls, doing some tricep kickbacks. Like we're finding something to do. If we're at the gym, we're lifting stuff while we're talking. And so it isn't just that you're dedicating 40 straight minutes to doing a warm up, hitting a progressive overload workout, having a proper cool down plus mobility. Sometimes it's just stuff that you're doing throughout the day. Guys that work hard labor jobs tend to have more muscle than guys that work desk jobs. And I think that becomes part of the thing of, number one, you have access to equipment to use. You have space. You've got a really wonderful garage gym. It's a good place to hang out and talk. But while we're in there, use the stuff that's around us.
But that's where that 30-year base, 30-year base comes in, Joe, because when you and I are standing around talking, we can do 100 pull-ups, 100 dips, 100 push-ups without even trying, without getting out of breath, without getting sore. You can't do that if you're fresh off the couch week one. You probably can't do one pull-up or two pull-ups, especially if you're sitting at 28% body fat. So to get rid of all the noise, to get rid of all the confusion, if you want to be at 10% body fat, you're probably looking at 2 solid workouts a day. Would that be fair? You're looking at weights in the morning, cardio at night, or vice versa. You are looking at a lot of activity. You're probably not working a desk job. You're probably moving around, whether that's you're cutting your lawn, you're doing your landscaping, you're in a job that allows you to be on your feet a little bit more, because there's working out and activity, right? You can go work out, but if you have to sit for 8 hours a day after that, you're probably not going to be the leanest person. Now, can you trick that with diet and stuff? Sure. But now you're into an extremely strict diet where you're weighing and measuring and trying to figure out how to make up with the lack of activity. Like, Joe, if you walked 10 miles a day for your job, and I say this tongue in cheek, you could probably eat whatever you want and not worry about putting on weight. You probably burn everything off.
It is a balance. There's the amount you're taking in and the amount you're burning. And to a certain degree, you can kind of tilt those scales. But thinking about the desk job, because that can be a real crutch for people. It reminds me of our friend George, who works a desk job, real high level up with, what is the power company over in Europe?
National Grid. He's not there anymore, but
at the time. Stuff. But one of his things was that he did have his workout scheduled. It was on the calendar, just like a meeting, so that he could always hit that. But he also kept kettlebells in his office. And so rather than just sitting at the desk all day, he's got to be on a phone call. He'd stand up, do a couple squats, and he could mark it down on the marker board there and just accumulate stuff throughout the day. So his desk job wasn't forcing him to sit in that desk job the whole day. He could get up and move around a little bit. So he took advantage of that. And obviously it paid off because the dude looks great.
And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to be 10% body fat, Joe. Like I said, you're probably looking at 2 hard workouts a day with a lot of activity. Almost every bodybuilder I know that's serious about it, they're doing that early morning cardio and they're doing the weights in the afternoon. They're not working out 3 times a week or twice a week or 4 times a week. Like, you're showing up a lot and you're doing a lot of activity. We talked about 75 hard on the last podcast. If you're doing 75 hard, I've seen people make some incredible changes off of 75 hard. And 75 hard, if you're not familiar with it, it has 2 workouts a day. One has to be inside, one has to be outside. And the outside one is probably going to be cardio, because most people aren't going to the park and doing a bunch of calisthenics, right? Yeah. So you're doing, again, that kind of formula. And I'm watching people come off 75 hard and they're not at 10% body fat. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're looking at from an activity level. So if you're watching this, you're like, hey, man, I want to be 10%. Well, here's the cost. You're probably working out twice a day and doing a lot of activity. Then on the other side, you're not eating like trash, Joe. You're not eating Doritos. You're not drinking soda. Like, if you look at somebody, I always say this, if you look at somebody that's shredded, they probably eat like a person that's shredded. Is there the odd person that seemingly eats like garbage and is shredded? Yes. But they probably eat, if a person looks shredded, they probably eat like a person that's shredded, right? Yeah. On the other hand, if a person looks like they day drink, they probably day drink.
Yeah.
Or conversely, if you day drink, you're going to look like somebody that day drinks.
Well, yeah, you become who you hang around, right?
Right. So, I mean, like, if you're the guy that's having a couple of beer on a Saturday afternoon and eating a plate of chicken wings or eating Doritos, you are not going to be 10%. So the other thing with 10% is you're not just doing the activity. It probably implies that you are watching your diet. You have an idea of your macronutrient ratio, and you're probably limiting your calories to a certain degree.
Yes.
Right? There's the old saying, Joe, you can't out eat a trash diet. I say it a different way, but I'll get flagged here and they'll pull my engagement if I cuss too much. But if you eat like trash, that's kind of true. You're Michael Phelps and you're swimming for 5-6 hours a day. You're working out 1,300 hours a year, which is like 25, 26 hours a week. You can eat whatever you want. You can eat the Lucky Charms. You can go to Subway. You can have the chips. You can have the soda. If you're pulling a Bobby Maximus level of activity where you are working out in the morning, then going to jiu-jitsu, then going for a walk, then working out at night, yeah, you have a little bit of leeway with your diet. But back to the original thing we talked about, Joe, our friend George, if you're working out once a day or 4 times a week and then you're sitting at a desk, you had better have a really good handle on your diet.
Yeah. Because again, there's no margin of error. And the closer you get to 10%, the smaller that margin is. Because you can go 50% effort. If you're 35% body fat, it'll get you down to 20. But at a certain point, it ain't going to cut it anymore. And you're going to have to get stricter and stricter and stricter until you get down to those like single digits. There is no room for error. None whatsoever.
No, you got to really, really monitor. Well, I was talking earlier how I range from 10 to 15, depending on how much jiu-jitsu I'm doing.
Yeah.
If I'm doing 5 or 6 extra jiu-jitsu sessions a week, even if that's only 500 calories in a session, Joe, that's an extra pound a week of body fat that I'm burning off.
Yeah.
Well, not quite. It's a little under a pound, but you get the point.
Yeah. But it adds up.
Yeah.
And I think there's the other side of this equation because, again, you can't outwork a bad diet. But if you are like a Michael Phelps, like how many calories are you burning in a day? Like how much energy is your body processing? There's a cost to that as well. I mean, there's a metabolic tax to that. So you can go out and you can just work like a horse, but guess what? You're going to get beat up. You're eventually going to break down. Your joints, your muscles, your heart, your lungs, like they can only take so much. And even your digestive system to give you the energy to constantly refuel the muscles at that level. If you're burning 10,000 calories a day, you can't do that forever. In the short term, maybe. But there again, you do that long enough, you are going to end up with like some serious metabolic damage. So you've got to balance that out between the levels of activity and the amount that you're eating. You can't just swing the pendulum all one way and either eat nothing and do nothing or eat everything you can see, but then try to run marathons every day to burn those calories.
Yeah. And I want to add though, Joe, if you do want to do the Michael Phelps thing, I think it is worth it for 32, 38, 47, 953 gold medals or whatever he has.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it is.
Anytime he feels bad about how he feels, he's got this little box full of gold medals and he can just count them out. And
I always say performance isn't healthy.
No,
if you go into a sport where you want to perform, you want to run a 2:08 marathon, you want to play in the NBA, you're probably going to have some issues like all the guys that were in the NBA. And it's funny, a lot of people look at the NBA as not a contact sport. There's a lot of contact in the NBA. And they all have bad ankles, bad calves, bad knees, bad hips, bad shoulders. Like it's part of the deal. But that's probably not
like
you.
Basketball is such a vertical sport. There's so much explosive, like jumping and landing and rebounding and impact. And then you add on the average of running, 8 miles in a game?
Yeah, and then you go up for a dunk and you get hit and you fall from 10 feet in the air on your hip. Like it is not easy, but that's probably not you. No. You're probably watching this. You're working at a desk. You have a regular job. You want to lose a little bit body fat. You hopped on Google. What's a good body fat percentage for a guy? Google told you it was 10%. And then you decided to go down the rabbit hole. How am I going to lose some body fat? And then you couldn't get a real answer from people. Because if it was that easy, what were the numbers you spit out to start the podcast? 28% is the average for a guy. Apparently 10% isn't that easy. So when you Googled what's a good body fat percentage for a guy, 10% is a little bit misleading. Like I'd like to see you aim more for 14 or 15, Joe. I think that's a lot more.
If you're 28, let's aim for 27 first. Let's get that
26,
first step
25, 20.
Amen. You can do it by degrees. You don't have to jump all in. And it's not like you have to be Mr. Universe or nothing. Like there's areas in between. So just shoot for that next most achievable goal, make that your reality, and then you can make adjustments and you can decide, am I happy now with the way that I look? I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, man, I look great. I feel great. Life is good. Then you're done. Who cares what the number is? But if you're just like, you know what, I want to be a little bit leaner, well, you're going to have to dial it in. Is it worth that effort?
Yeah, even sub 20 for a guy is probably pretty good. Like I have a guy in the gym right now, Joe, he actually started at 33. He was up at 315 pounds, and now he's down at 21, and he's 260 pounds. That's what that kind of change looks like. But at 21, he feels good. He looks good. He looks great in a suit. He looks great in a shirt. Like 20% for guys, that's probably a reasonable number. Again, on a DEXA, not in a bod pod, not on the electricity thing, but that's probably a good number on a DEXA. So now that we've just spent, I don't know, an hour discouraging you how you're never going to be 10%, let's talk about, Joe, some simple things people can do to lose some body fat. All right? So number one, just work out every day. I don't want to hear your BS about overtraining. You're not going to overtrain on 1 hour of exercise a day. Olympic athletes are training 700, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 hours a year. In fact, most are over 1,000. They didn't get there overnight. They didn't start off with 1,000 hours a year. They had to build up, of course, but an hour a day, 7 days a week. What is that, Joe? 350 hours a year. You are not going to overtrain off of that. I promise you. And if you're just starting, you're not capable of going hard enough in that hour to cause yourself any real damage. So you just got to get in every single day.
And how often does it happen where somebody starts out and on Monday they do a bunch of like air squats, and then on Tuesday their legs are so sore that they can't work out on Wednesday, and then Thursday they're not feeling very motivated, and so now they've gotten 1, maybe 2 workouts in the first week. But my thing is, if your legs are sore, what are you doing about it? Are you just standing there watching them be sore? Are you getting out the foam roller? Are you doing some massage? Are you doing some work? Have you go sit in a sauna, a hot tub, do an ice bath, like do something to take the soreness out so you can get back to the gym.
Yeah, or eventually you go for a damn walk.
Amen. Right? And here's that's the thing. What are you doing rather than just sitting there feeling miserable? You've got to be able to put that effort in too.
And here, I want to say a couple of things to make sure we're encouraging, Joe, because we want to build people up, right?
Right.
Number one, we're telling you, you got to go 7 days a week. That's not exactly true. If you're off the couch, if you're doing absolutely nothing, 1's going to be better, but eventually you got to go to 2. Once you're doing 2's great. You're going to get a certain result off it, but pretty soon you got to do 3, and then you got to do 4, and then you got to do 5. So yes, if you can only go 2 or 3 times a week right now, that will be better than nothing, but you got to have an eye to build up. So we just say, do something every single day. Number 2, you have to start going harder in the gym. Just showing up and walking on a treadmill, watching TV is probably not going to cut it. You gotta push yourself a little bit. I want your clothes sweaty. I want you breathing hard. I want you to suffer. I want there to be a little bit of discomfort. And then number 3, to start, even though I just said you have to show up every day, and even though I just said you have to go harder, you don't have to go hard every single day. You just have to win more days than you lose. So Joe, on Monday, you go do those air squats. You're sore on Tuesday, go for a walk. You're back again Wednesday, go hard again. You're sore Thursday, go for a walk, but force yourself to do something and expand your definition of what a workout is. Yeah. A workout that day could be an hour walk, as long as the next day, then you're doing your weights, then you're going harder.
Well, John Welborn had a really good saying about fitness is about moving a pile of dirt. Like some days you're using a backhoe and you can just move tons of dirt that day. And some days you got like a little spoon. But as long as you keep moving dirt, eventually that whole pile is going to shift. And that's the goal. We're at the 28% body fat pile. We're trying to get to the 25. We got to move that dirt. We want to get down to 20. We got to move that dirt again. And so it's always leaning forward. The more days that you can move more dirt, great. But as long as you move a teaspoonful, we're still making progress. But we have to make progress every day. If you're not doing anything, no dirt is moving.
Yeah. And by the way, I just grabbed my phone. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're like, this Emmer effer right here. He's so bored of this podcast. He's on his phone checking text messages. I'm not. I'm getting my little calculator out, Joe. But we're talking about 28% body fat, right? So if you are 250 pounds and you're at 28% body fat, you have 70 pounds of fat on you. Fair? So say you want to lose, I'm going to say even 30 pounds of body fat. That's going to cut your body fat right down. But 30 pounds of body fat at what did you say? 3,500 calories per pound? And that number changes. Some people are like, oh, it's 3,600. Some people say, oh, it's actually 4,120. We're going to go with 3,500. So 3,500 times 30 is 105,000 calories. That's the calorie deficit you've got to create roughly, because there are some other things that go into this, Joe. You talked about stress. We talked about genetics, those things. But you're looking at about 105,000 calorie deficit you have to create to lose 30 pounds of body fat. So on your standard workout, Joe, in an hour, you're going in, you're walking on a treadmill, you're lifting a little bit of weight, you're moving around a little bit. Let's say you burn an extra 500 calories. It's going to take you 210 days.
Yeah. And that's consistent days. So if you take the day off,
body fat,
it's going to be 211. If you take another day off a week from now, it's going to be 212.
212. And we're not even paying attention to diet right now, because if you go out on a Friday night and you're watching the NBA playoffs and you have 4 beer and a plate of chicken wings, well, there's an extra 2,000 calories you need. Add 4 days to that total, Joe. Yeah, so that's why I'm so big on the activity every day. And when I say workout, expand your horizons. It's not just being at the gym pumping iron. It could be, again, walking. It could be going to the Ninja Warrior Park. You want to work out? Go to the trampoline park with your kids and actually play with them. You will be sweating. Or I had a buddy in the gym today. I was talking to him about landscaping, right? Like how it's really hard work. You got to get out and mow the lawn. You got to move stuff. You got to plant stuff. You got to dig. And he's like, yeah. So he did this yesterday. He had to mow his lawn. He did a bunch of stuff. He's like, man, you were not kidding. Like that was hard work. And his house has got an uphill grade. So he's pushing this mower uphill and then downhill and then uphill and downhill. Anyway, that could be your form of activity every day, but you got to do something every day. And the shorter you want to work out, the workouts in our app, Joe, they're 30 to 40 minutes, but they are hard AF. If you want to go shorter, if you can only go 20 or 30 or 40 minutes, you got to have the pedal to the metal. You got to be all gas, no brakes.
Yes.
So that's number one.
My most intense workouts are the ones where it's like, oh crap, I only got 20 minutes and I got to get something in.
And boom, you got to go.
Off to the races.
So that's number one. Workout every day. Number two, we need more activity, Joe.
Yeah.
If you're sitting, there was a stat I put in my book that sitting for 8 hours will cancel out 90% of your 1 hour workout. I don't know if it works exactly like that and who came up with that math. It's a study I cited for the book. But the point is, if you're sitting all day, you have no leeway with your diet or your workout program. The more active you are, the more you can walk, the more you can take the stairs instead of the elevator, the more you can do your own landscaping and cut your own lawn, the more you're up and down the stairs in a day, the more you clean your own house, the more you walk around and you're on your feet, you give yourself a buffer, Joe. So if your workout wasn't that hard that day, you still had a significant calorie burn. If you cheated on your diet a little bit, you still will end up in a net deficit because that's what you're trying to create.
Yeah.
It's simple. Walk. Like, Joe, if we're going to have a phone call after this to talk about the podcast, we should both be on our feet walking, not sitting in the couch. Like, do your activity. And how does that work? Well, it can work in reverse too, Joe. So you want to eat those chicken wings and you want to have those 4 beer because you feel better watching the NBA when you have beer and chicken wings. Great. If you were to walk just 500 extra calories a day, Joe, what would that take? That's a good, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour? Do me a favor. Google what an hour of walking looks like. How many calories does an hour of walking burn? You're going to get all kinds of numbers, right? You're going to get like a bunch of numbers, but what's it going to say?
Let's see. Probably get the AI. On average, a person can burn between 2 and 350 calories per hour walking at a moderate pace.
Okay, so I was overestimating, but therefore 10 1-hour walks, could we say that that'll buy you 3,000 calories, Joe?
Yeah.
Like in a way, because you burn 3, right? So if you can walk for 10 days straight, yes, when you go watch your NBA game, you can have your beer and your chicken wings, and it's like a net write-off or whatever you want to call it. It zeroes out.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm so big on the activity. Easy.
All right. So let's talk about the nutrition. Let's assume that we're doing all the things. We're working out. We're managing our stress. We're getting our sleep. We're doing all the recovery stuff. We have to drive that transformation through nutrition. So what are the rules? What do I eat, Bobby?
Okay, number 1, no processed food. Now, there is some truth, and it's a law of thermodynamics, Joe, that you could get shredded off a diet of donuts. If you were willing to only eat 900 calories of donuts a day, you could get completely shredded off that. The problem is you will be starving all the time. You will feel like garbage. You will have no energy. You'll be sick all the time. Like, that's not a good lifestyle choice. Like the Brad Pitt diet for Fight Club where you eat McDonald's once a day, probably not a smart decision, not a balanced diet, if you will. So the first thing is no processed food. I love these memes I see on the internet where they show like different meals you can get for 1,200 calories. And on the left is like a Starbucks drink and like a muffin, and it's 1,200 calories. And then they show all the food, non-processed, you can get for 1,200 calories. And it's an insane amount of food. Like, you will be stuffed. So no processed food. Number 2, Joe, for a guy, I would limit my calories to 2,200 to 2,500 calories a day. And if you're a smaller guy, probably lower than that. Yeah. Like, that should be the upper end of your caloric consumption. Here's the good news. That might sound low to you. Even 1,800 if you want to make a real transformation in 3 months and you want to drive it. But that might sound low. If you're eating non-processed food, it's actually a lot of food. You're going to be fairly satiated at the end of the day. So let's actually call it 2,000 calories a day. That would be a good number. If you ate that, you would probably, especially if you're walking around at 28% body fat, you will see that fat melt off. I guarantee you that. Yeah,
for sure. I'm just looking up right now. How many strawberries for 2,000 calories? Because my guess is this is going to be a ton.
By the way, I love that we have Google that we could just ask it questions.
A medium-sized strawberry, one strawberry is 4 calories. So 50 strawberries would only be 200 calories. So we're talking like,
so you're eating a lot of strawberries in a day.
Yeah.
Right. So you can have a lot of food. And if you're having lean meat, you're having chicken, you're having stuff like that, Joe, like, you can get a lot of food in for 2,000 calories.
Yeah. Versus, like you said, getting one bite and then just having to hang on until the next day.
Yeah. And now we'll talk about macros. The only macro I want you to pay attention to really is your protein. 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight a day. You probably don't need that much, but if you're eating that much, you're going to feel satiated. It's actually pretty hard, Joe. You know, you count your protein. It's hard to hit that protein goal every single day.
Yeah, and always during the podcast, I'm sipping on this. There's 40 grams of protein in this shake. So, like, that's one of the ways that I get it. That's one of those shakes. There's like everything else you eat, all the other shakes you got to take. Like, to get that number, it's a process.
What if you had to do it through beef tenderloin steak or sirloin steak and chicken breast?
That's a lot of meat.
You're eating a lot, right? So you're going to be full. So pay attention to the protein first. And protein's a building block. You need it to build muscle. You need it to run your bodily functions. Protein's going to be a great thing. After that, I like the low carb diet. It's more enjoyable for me because I do like a fattier piece of meat. I do like my ribeye. And I do like, Joe, like the other foods I like I love avocados, and I generally gravitate towards low carbohydrate choices. But I've seen people go on higher carb, lower fat diets and see an equal, if not better amount of success. So I don't really care how you fill in the rest of your macronutrients as long as you are staying under that, we'll say that 2,000 calorie range or 2,200 or 2,500 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's easier to manage your nutrition when there's less things to worry about. If you have to weigh and measure every bite of food and you have to track your protein, your fat, your carbs, like it gets to be really overwhelming. But if you're like, you know what, I got to stay under 2,000 calories and I got to get over 200 grams of protein, it's a lot easier to dial that in. In fact, our mutual friend Ethan and I, when we were in college, we went on this thing where there was only one rule, was that we were just trying to eat more protein than carbs. And so when you'd look at a food label, it was like, oh, this has too much carbs in it. You know, we were looking at a jar of peanut butter at the grocery store. We were college roommates. And it's like, you have a choice between one that's got tons of sugar or one that's very low sugar. You end up going with that one because the goal is to always get more protein. And that was a really effective, that was our fighting diet when we were on the Taekwondo team at the university.
If you did that, you would get leaner.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really that simple, Joe. If you could do those three things, we'll cap it there. If you were to exercise every single day, like you're doing a workout, then you were to get more activity in the real world, if you will, then you were going to watch your diet, the weight would melt off. And my guy, by the way, in the gym that went from 315 to 260, that's all he's done, Joe. And by the way, I went to both his kids' birthday parties. I watched him eat some Chick-fil-A. I watched him eat some Jimmy John's. I watched him have some pizza. He has had some adult beverages. He has cheated a bit. But overall, because he has stuck to those core principles, I'm going to say 6 out of 7 days, he's done really, really well for himself. It's that simple.
But I think the big takeaway on this is that it's something that fits within his lifestyle. So he didn't have to like completely become a different person. He had to make a couple of changes, make them permanent, make them part of how he lives his life most of the time. And there's an impact. And that impact is that he's lost a ton of weight. Now, if he wants to continue and get leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner, he's going to have to make harder and harder choices. But I think that's just the nature of like the difficulty of trying to get down to those single digit type numbers.
Well, and that's why that number floated around, Joe, before we sign off. When I'm like 2,000 calories, 2,200, 2,500, and I'm hesitant to give you like a answer written in stone. 2,500 calories a day might do it for you for the first 60 days.
Yeah.
And then you might have to cut more, and then you might have to cut more, and then you have to exercise more. The bottom line is, to get more fit, you have to do more work. So if you're out there listening to this, you want to get down to that mythical 10% body fat, you just want to lose some weight, you want to look better, you want to feel better, you got to get to work out every day, more activity, and watch your nutrition. Hopefully this has given you a really good insight. I say hopefully, you know it has. This is called the Be Real Podcast, where you will get real fitness and lifestyle information from two of the best coaches on the planet. Thank you for watching. And we didn't bother you with ads. We didn't throw a bunch of codes down your throat. You can support us by liking, commenting, subscribing, turning your notifications on, and sharing this with every single person you know. In fact, when you get done listening to this podcast, send this to your friends. Send them a simple message. You're fat and you need help. And then link them to this podcast. Let us know how that goes for you, by the way.
Yes. We'll feature the best stories in a future episode.
Yes. All right. We'll see you guys later.